In the humid valleys and rolling hills of southern Africa, the year was 1879. It was a time when empires stretched their ambitions across continents, and the British Empire, at the height of its global power, sought to impose its will on the proud Zulu kingdom. What followed was not the swift victory London expected, but a sobering reminder that imperial arrogance could be humbled by indigenous might. This is the story of the Anglo-Zulu War, a conflict born of diplomacy twisted into ultimatum, of battles that shook Victorian Britain to its core, and of a people who dared to resist an empire. The Zulu kingdom had been forged earlier in the century under the iron hand of Shaka Zulu. By 1879, Shaka's successors had consolidated a disciplined military state, ruled by King Setshwanyo Ka Mpande. Setshwanyo was no reckless warmonger. He sought to maintain the sovereignty of his people, defending Zulu land from encroachment while avoiding unnecessary provocations. Yet the tide of British colonial expansion had already swept through southern Africa, and the independence of the Zulu nation stood as an obstacle to the grand plans of imperial officials. The man who engineered the conflict was Sir Henry Bartle Frere, the British High Commissioner for Southern Africa. Obsessed with creating a confederation of colonies and African states under British rule, Frere viewed the Zulus as a threat to stability. Without the approval of London, he prepared an ultimatum so severe that no sovereign ruler could accept it. Issued in December 1878, it demanded that Setshwanyo disband his army, allow a British resident within his territory, and accept terms that would strip his kingdom of independence. When the deadline expired in January 1879, war became inevitable. The British strategy relied on speed and overwhelming force. Lord Chelmsford, commander of British forces, advanced into Zululand with columns of red-coated infantry, cavalry, artillery, and supply trains. They expected an easy conquest. After all, they carried rifles, machine guns, and field artillery, while the Zulus bore shields, assegai spears, and captured muskets. The war seemed already won on paper. Yet the landscape of Natal and Zululand, its rocky ridges, tall grass, and sweeping plains, favored those who knew it best. On January 22, 1879, the illusion of British invincibility was shattered at the Battle of Isandlwana. Chelmsford had split his army, leaving a camp poorly fortified at the foot of the mountain. There, 20,000 Zulu warriors, organized into disciplined regiments, swept down in the famous Horns of the Buffalo formation. Accounts describe the earth trembling as they advanced, their chants echoing like thunder. British soldiers, firing in tight formations, inflicted terrible casualties, but the sheer weight of numbers overwhelmed them. Ammunition wagons failed to reach the firing lines in time, and discipline collapsed. By the end of that day, over 1,300 British and colonial troops lay dead, compared to perhaps 1,000 Zulus. For the first time in the modern age, a European army equipped with rifles and artillery had been annihilated by a native force. News of the disaster shocked London. Newspapers called it a humiliation unparalleled in colonial history. A stunned Queen Victoria wrote in her journal of the most dreadful disgrace. And yet, amid the disaster, another story was written, one of defiance and survival. Just hours after Isandlwana, a Zulu impi of 4,000 turned on a small mission station at Rorke's Drift, defended by barely 150 men. The garrison was composed of British soldiers, many of them ill or wounded, and two determined lieutenants, John Chard and Gonville Bromhead. For nearly 12 hours, wave after wave of Zulus assaulted the barricades of mealie bags and wagons. At times, Chard later wrote, the air was thick with assegais, and the cries of the warriors drowned the sound of our rifles. Somehow, the defenders held, At dawn, the Zulus withdrew. Out of that desperate night came 11 Victoria Crosses, the most ever awarded in a single battle, and the myth of British heroism was salvaged from catastrophe. The war raged on for months. Reinforcements poured into South Africa as Britain sought vengeance for Isandlwana. Chelmsford, though criticized for his failures, was determined to redeem himself. In April, the British struck back, defeating Zulu forces at Jinganlavu and lifting the siege of Esho. By June, they advanced again, this time with caution, building fortified camps and moving with heavier firepower. The climax came at the Battle of Ulundi on July 4, 1879. King Setshwayo gathered his remaining warriors for a final stand outside his capital. Nearly 20,000 Zulus charged the British square, a wall of bayonets bristling with Gatling guns at the corners. The firepower was merciless. Contemporary witnesses recalled the grass set aflame by cannon shells, the cries of men lost in the smoke. When it ended, 1,500 Zulus lay dead, compared to just 12 British soldiers. Ulundi burned, and with it, the independence of the Zulu kingdom. Setshwayo was captured weeks later, first imprisoned in Cape Town and later taken to London. There he became an unlikely celebrity, tall, regal, and dignified. He met with Queen Victoria herself. The monarch described him as a fine man with a sad but noble countenance. In 1883, he was briefly restored as a ruler, though stripped of real power. His kingdom had been partitioned and weakened, and his death in 1884 marked the end of an era. The aftermath of the war was bitter for both sides. The Zulu people had fought with courage and inflicted one of the greatest defeats in British military history, but their independence was lost. For the British Empire, victory came at a staggering cost. Nearly 7,000 lives had been lost, and the aura of invincibility was forever dimmed. More importantly, Isandlwana remained a scar on the imperial conscience, a reminder that empire could bleed. In the long arc of history, the Anglo-Zulu War symbolized the clash between imperial ambition and indigenous resistance. It was not merely a colonial skirmish, but a turning point in the mythology of empire. For the Zulu, it was the last stand of a proud kingdom. For Britain, a lesson in humility cloaked in eventual triumph. The war is remembered in songs, oral histories, and monuments, Zulu elders still recounting the bravery of their forefathers, while British regimental museums preserve the memory of Isandlwana and Rorke's Drift. Today, the rolling hills of KwaZulu-Natal are peaceful. Tourists walk the ridges of Isandlwana, where cairns of white stones mark the mass graves of British soldiers. At Rorke's Drift, a quiet chapel stands where the barricades once rose against the night. The silence of these landscapes carries the echoes of that war, of spears against rifles, of empire against nation, of courage against arrogance. The failed Anglo-Zulu War endures as a story of resistance and resilience. It reminds us that history is not always written by the victors, for sometimes the memory of defeat shapes an empire more profoundly than its victories. And in the end, it is not only about who conquered, but about those who dared to fight against impossible odds. This episode was made possible by extensive research, primary accounts, and the voices of those who lived through the storm of 1879. If you value the telling of such stories, stories that breathe life into the past and honor the struggles of those who came before, consider supporting this work. Every effort ensures that history is not forgotten, but remembered with the depth and dignity it deserves.